Good morning, everyone. Dr. Panit Lausidirat, Executive Director of the FTPI, the teams of the FTPI, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to everyone. I would like to first start by congratulating the FTPI for the 25th anniversary. It is a very important milestone, and our sincere congratulations to you and the team. I would like also to ask your apologies for not being able to be present in the celebration this morning because of that I have a cold, and somehow doctor has advised me not to travel. But nonetheless, it is not actually less appreciation from us, and we really would like to congratulate once again the FTPI. I have been asked to share a brief message about the challenges in boosting productivity movement in Asia and the Pacific. And this theme has been an important topic, and this is actually a very relevant topic for us, even from the time of the founding of the APO and as well as current days. I will later on present the slides of my presentation, but let me just underline two things, and that is one, the context, how it was at the time when we started the productivity movement at the establishment of the APO, and then I will go to the second part, which are the challenges. The first one, the context. By next year, the APO will celebrate 60th anniversary. This will be 6 decades of the Asian productivity journey. And at that time, if we go back to the history of productivity movement in Asia, we remember the establishment of what we call the JPC, the Japan Productivity Center, in 1955, and in other actually as that become the APO member countries like India, Korea, also similar organizations were actually established around the same time. And at that time, it was about 10 years after the end of the World War II, where peace and stability finally prevailed and economic development started. The challenges of the economic development at that time was actually very obvious, and that is the standard of living, increasing production, and in the case of Japan at that time was doubling the income, the national income. So the APO, spearheaded by the Japan Productivity Center at that time, then established the APO. And the challenges, as I said, was quite different. It was basically the economic development at the very beginning era of the Asian economies. And so fast forward a little bit, and we went to the 1980s when we looked into what we call the progress by the ASEAN, the Asian tigers or dragons, the NIEs, the newly industrial emerging economies. And we have the cases like Hong Kong, Singapore, Korea, for example, including Taiwan, that actually becomes the newly industrialized countries. And underpinning that was actually productivity. And now we are looking into the 60th anniversary of the APO. What we are looking actually still there is productivity gap between and among the APO members. And just briefly, there are 3 challenges that I would like to share with you regarding the challenges of the productivity movement at this point of time. The first challenge is the innovation challenge. And now the key driver of productivity has changed. When we were in the early beginning, it was basically labor-driven productivity. And now the sources of productivity has changed, and it becomes innovation-driven. The second challenge of productivity is actually inclusiveness. So productivity movement actually should be broad-based. It's not only a matter of the NPOs, but also it has to be shared by the industry, by business, by all segments of the societies. And the third challenge is actually institution. The institutional means basically the setup of it includes the setup of the NPOs and how actually leadership takes actually also influence and drive productivity. I will elaborate all this in the slides to come after this. But once again, I would like to congratulate the FTPI for the 25th anniversary, and once again, our sincerest congratulations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Secretary General. This is Jam, a program officer at the APO. I've been asked by the Secretary General to talk about the challenges in boosting the productivity movement in Asia and the Pacific. This is an important topic, which is at the heart of APO's mission and work. I'd like to begin by thinking about where the region is now. In the 19th century, the economic center of gravity was in Europe. In the 20th century, it was in North America. Now, in the 21st century, it has shifted to Asia and the Pacific. Numerous commentators refer to our current era as the Asian century. Within a single generation, our region has transitioned from low to middle income status. This has resulted in hundreds of millions of people being lifted out of extreme poverty and higher living standards being enjoyed by people at every income level. Asia accounts for a third of global trade in goods. Its share of global airline passengers has risen from 33% to 40%, and its contribution to global capital flows has increased from 13% to 23%. The region is home to 21 of the world's 30 largest cities and to 4 of the 10 most visited ones. Not only are external flows being channeled into the region, but there are also dynamic networks flourishing within it. Around 60% of the region's total trade in goods is intra-regional, and 74% of regional travel is by Asians. In the decades ahead, Asia's economies are expected to make the change from participating in these flows to determining their very shape and direction. In fact, in many areas, from the internet to trade in luxury goods, they already are. A key part of this remarkable story of development has to do with the historical productivity movements in Asia, as mentioned by the Secretary General. The experience of Japan in the 1950s, the Republic of Korea in the 1970s, and Singapore in the 1980s show clearly how a sustained movement that involves the government, industry, workers, academics, and citizens can create dynamic growth. While good economic and structural policies were important in that creation process, there was also a need for mass participation from broader society. Beyond setting policy, development efforts involved transforming people's values, mindsets, and aspirations. Quality and productivity became a part of national culture as people embraced teamwork and creativity. The APO believes that for the region to achieve continued development, the productivity movement remains vitally important. Long-term growth depends on broad-based productivity enhancement, and productivity enhancement will depend on a revitalized productivity movement. It is true that despite progress, many serious social and economic challenges remain. These challenges are fundamentally linked to our productivity and to the productivity movement in Asia-Pacific. Productivity growth in Asia still outperforms that seen in other regions. However, in a few economies, notably the People's Republic of China, but also the Republic of Korea, the Philippines, and Thailand, there was a slowdown in productivity growth after the global financial crisis in 2008. In some of these countries, that slowdown was not a temporary blip, but represented a new normal. The economies of this region face both short and medium-term risks. These include financial market volatility, rising trade tensions, and slowing momentum in the People's Republic of China. Some of these risks may pass, while others may become persistent constraints on the global economy. For example, current trade turmoil may lead to a long-term reduction in economic integration and openness. This slows productivity growth by making the diffusion of technology and knowledge more difficult. Tariffs and other barriers to trade also reduce the incentives for firms to adapt and raise their productivity in the face of international competition. Additionally, there are also structural issues. For example, many economies will have to cope with the transition to services, where high productivity growth is generally considered to be more difficult to achieve than in manufacturing, as well as facing the problems of rapid population aging. These current and potential causes of low productivity growth should be a serious concern for policymakers, hoping for long-term improvements in living standards. Reinforcing the centrality of productivity should be a priority for all governments looking to generate long-term socioeconomic development. At the same time, we must acknowledge that times have changed. While many classic productivity tools and techniques are still valuable, to ensure that the productivity movement remains relevant and effective, our understanding of productivity needs to be updated and new approaches taken. In line with what the Secretary General has mentioned, our concept of productivity must be updated to reflect the key contemporary challenges, what we call the 3 I's. The first, innovation; the second, inclusion; and third, institutions. I'd like to explain these challenges from the productivity perspective, before giving some examples of how the APO is working to tackle them. The first challenge is the need for Asia-Pacific economies to pursue innovation-led productivity growth. Over time, the key source of productivity growth has changed. Broadly, it has shifted from labor to various kinds of capital, such as machinery, knowledge, etc. Much of the growth in the region has been driven by capital accumulation, rather than the assimilation of existing technologies from advanced economies or domestic innovation. Productivity growth from capital accumulation is ultimately unsustainable, and economies must find new sources of progress. While the diffusion of technology and applications of international best practices in management are important for productivity growth, domestic innovation must play an increasing role. This is especially true for economies close to technological frontiers. Further from the frontiers, it is important to reap the potential benefits of the digital revolution while also working to minimize its costs. Many countries find themselves stuck in a middle-income trap. They're no longer able to compete internationally in labor-intensive commodities because of high wages, but also cannot compete in higher value-added activities on a broad enough scale because productivity is too low. This prevents them from achieving high-income status. The core issue here is that domestic productive capabilities have not been developed sufficiently. For countries to progress at all levels, innovation, originating both domestically and internationally, must be supported. A significant potential source of productivity growth is the digital economy and its related technologies. In recent years, digitalization and automation have led a new wave of innovation due to advances in AI, robotics, computing power, and big data. There are Asian economies in the lead in nearly every aspect of digitalization. For example, automation relying on industrial robots is one area where some economies in Asia are trailblazers. These robots are applied almost exclusively in manufacturing, and with Asia acting as the factory of the world, it employs 2/3 of all industrial robots. At the same time, many Asian economies lag significantly behind in digital adoption. Digital technologies are general purpose and could affect all sectors of the economy. However, most of their benefits are currently seen only when technologies and the related know-how are diffused throughout society. To take advantage of these technologies, either to maintain leadership or to catch up, countries in the region need to strengthen their national innovation capabilities. To achieve innovation-led productivity growth, countries need to build up functional innovation ecosystems. This means a network of research and education bodies, startups, established firms, financial institutions, and government agencies which enable innovation. A range of policy responses can transform education to meet the demands for new skills and lifelong learning. At the same time, investments in infrastructure to promote competition and new ideas, while addressing social challenges that may arise from technological disruptions, are all needed. Obviously, technological progress does not affect all segments of societies in the same way. Some industries may have what economists call a strong technical bias, where capital infusions will cause workers to be displaced. If those workers cannot be redeployed, then overall productivity will likely not increase. Beyond that, displaced workers and other vulnerable members of society, like the elderly, minorities, women, the poor, and persons with disabilities, are often unable to fully benefit from economic growth. Countries in this region and beyond have agreed to align their development plans with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. This means that the social and environmental dimensions of sustainability must be prioritized alongside economic issues. In parallel to this, for the productivity movement to be relevant in the 21st century, it must also be aligned with sustainable development. This is what the APO calls the inclusion challenge, or finding ways to guide the productivity movement in Asia and the Pacific to focus on including as many segments of society as possible. This means that productivity will both benefit from and bring benefit to many more people in different walks of life. While the past 2 decades have seen tremendous economic growth and reductions in poverty, in many areas, pockets of poverty persist. During the same period, the region's combined income inequality increased by more than 5%, including in the most populous countries such as the People's Republic of China, India, and Indonesia. The Asia Pacific is home to the most billionaires worldwide, while at the same time millions of people still lack access to basic services. This pattern undermines the social contract formed between government and society, and has consequences for lasting peace and stability. The productivity movement in the region needs to be responsive to these realities by ensuring that productivity growth is broad-based and benefits those also at the bottom of the pyramid. In addition to the poor, many other currently marginalized groups should be engaged in the productivity movement. First, one of the major long-term structural challenges faced by economies in Asia is their rapidly aging populations. Older populations have historically meant a shrinking workforce, and this can amplify slowdowns in productivity growth. Second, gender inequality continues to hinder progress. Close to 2/3 of all working women in the Asia Pacific are in the informal sector, with insecure employment and little, if any, social protection. Across the region, women face barriers to full participation in the workforce, and others, such as youths, minorities, and persons with disabilities, are also systematically excluded from certain economic opportunities, and their needs are not considered in employment policy. To deal with the shrinking working population and to ensure that prosperity is shared equitably across society, these marginalized groups must be incorporated in the productivity movement. Moving on from the challenges of innovation, and inclusion, it should be understood that it will be an immense institutional challenge to coordinate all the various activities and programs that are necessary for sustained productivity growth throughout Asia Pacific. We first have to recognize that policies alone may not be enough. Productivity-focused organizations like the APO and the FTPI are therefore critical to harmonize activities and act as the connective tissue for the national and regional productivity movements. However, as in the historical examples of Japan and Singapore, this movement must be expanded through the active participation of businesses, industries, workers, government agencies, academia, community groups, and others. The traditional values associated with the productivity movement of hard work, constant improvement, and creativity need to be joined by new values, such as inclusion, innovation, and sustainability. These values should be spread through mass campaigns to build close relationships with the public and private sectors and citizens in general. The APO, NPOs, and other organizations interested in productivity need to think hard about how to engage new segments and to strengthen long-standing relationships. I'd like to now outline some key success factors for meeting these institutional challenges. Firstly, national movements depend on commitment from top leadership and core organizations responsible for implementing activities. The productivity movement is no exception. In addition to NPOs, various forms of high-level councils can help deal with productivity issues. These core organizations should be linked at the regional, district, and community levels so that productivity activities can be cascaded down and grassroots innovations cascaded up. In our network world, NPOs cannot be the only bodies promoting productivity, but they need to also act as catalysts and coordinators. By networking and assisting other institutions, NPOs can help build a strong, supportive institutional infrastructure. Secondly, awareness and adoption of values and culture related to productivity must be spread throughout society. This can be done through a combination of mass campaigns and building targeted relationships with key economic segments. This was traditionally done by holding conventions and symposiums on specific themes and promoting public relations and educational activities such as awards and productivity days. While those activities are still useful, newer, more inclusive platforms such as social networking sites can help us share productivity ideas and know-how more easily with more people than ever before. These new forms of communication are especially important for reaching segments that previously faced barriers to public information access, such as those in rural or remote areas, the poor, the elderly, and persons with disabilities. Now, it's an important time to answer the question, how can the APO and others address the challenges and revitalize the productivity movement? As the leading intergovernmental organization in the Asia Pacific focused on productivity enhancement, the APO is in a unique position to help coordinate a revitalized, expanded productivity movement in the region. It continues to fulfill its traditional roles of a clearinghouse for productivity information and a source of productivity-related expertise. At the same time, APO membership has increased in recent years to include Cambodia and now Turkey. Expanding the scope of APO's work and linking more organizations will spread the productivity movement further and farther than before. New and continuing collaborations with other international organizations, such as ASEAN, the IRRI, OECD, the SRI, DAP, and UN bodies remain vital. The APO is also exploring and acquiring new knowledge, while developing projects with experts in the areas of blockchain, big data, smart manufacturing, and innovation. It organizes multi-country projects where technical knowledge can be shared as well as tailor-made programs for specific members. In its projects, the APO engages both the public and private sectors at all levels, from organizing training courses for general staff and managers to working with government ministers on national policy. An example of this is that the APO has assisted Bangladesh, Cambodia, Fiji, and Pakistan in developing national productivity strategies and master plan documents, and is set to work with more members on similar efforts this year. These higher-level engagements help to complement the capacity-building services normally provided by the APO. Additionally, the APO is now promoting inclusive productivity by researching and implementing projects related to female labor force participation and SMEs. Currently, the organization is also developing programs to promote the use of productivity tools and techniques by persons with disabilities. New modalities of delivering knowledge and skill training are also taken advantage of, such as video conferences, online courses, and live-streamed events. These will be scaled up in the future, and the organization will continue exploring new and better ways of spreading its message. In time to mark the 60th anniversary of APO's establishment in 2021, its next 5-year vision and official strategic direction for the coming years will be announced soon. In conclusion, in leading the productivity movement, the message that the Secretary General and the APO would like to deliver is that the APO cannot work alone. The most important work must be done by stakeholders in each member country. Making the next 100 years truly the Asian century will require hard work from all segments of society. And this will be especially true if the Asian century is as prosperous, inclusive, and sustainable as all of us hope. I ask everyone who shares the vision of a prosperous, productive Asia-Pacific to work together and to cooperate with the APO to make our vision a reality. Thank you.